Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claris Community Live. It's my pleasure today to welcome Wim Decorte from Soliant Consulting and Ronnie Rios from the Claris product team to talk about AI services in FileMaker Server 2025. And before we get started, I just want to invite everybody to the next two episodes in our FileMaker 2025 launch party. On Monday, Robert Holsley will join the live stream with Clay Mackel, and they're going to talk about the new data everywhere features of the entire Claris platform. So that will include improvements to Claris Studio, Claris Connect, and how all of that works with Claris FileMaker 2025. And then on Tuesday, I'll be joined by Rick Coleman and Vince Minano from Beeswax, and we're going to talk about everything else in FileMaker 2025. So we'll have two more packed episodes in the next few days. And also, if you could please, I'm starting this morning's poll, and as yesterday, Ronnie has lots of questions he'd like to know about how you are adopting AI. And what are your plans? What have you done so far? So if you could please answer our quick 4-question poll now, and then later in the episode, we'll have another poll as we wrap up. We do appreciate your input on those questions. So with that, why don't we get started? And Ronnie and Wim, why might a developer or a company want to run a local AI model as opposed to using one of the many services that are now available?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. We've been thinking about this for quite some time, and especially generative AI, which has only been around for a few years, right? But it became clear to us very early on that AI is going to be an integral part of every application going forward. As important probably as having databases, right? So every application will have AI in one shape or form. And if that is true, and you believe that is true, then our community needs to have those tools, the tools necessary to create those AI-driven applications and be able to control how they deploy, how they manage, and how they run these AI tools. And so that choice is really important. And as you start adding more and more tools into that tool set, it becomes very, very clear that you need a place to easily manage and control all these tools. And so one of the main reasons why we looked at bringing those we're introducing in FileMaker 2025 as AI services, a brand new tab in the admin console, is to give you as a developer the ability to control how your data is moved, how his data is processed, how AI is used, and give you the choice of how and where you want to be able to leverage AI. If you want to do everything in the cloud, fantastic. If you want to run it in your own cloud environment, then you have the ability. If you want to run it on-prem in your own machine, then you have the ability to do that. But having control and having it made very easy and accessible, which is really what we're all about, is really the entire purpose of this. And obviously, privacy and security is paramount with all this. And again, I always believe that security starts with choice and being able to choose how and where you run things. And we believe that AI service is the first step in taking control of AI and having those choices. So we're really excited. There's so many things in here, and Wim we'll show some things that he's been playing around and giving some ideas on how to use it. But just a very high level, I mean, you're with this release in AI services, you're getting the ability to very easily have embedding models, right? For the capability that we introduced last year, now you'll be able to download and host and manage embedding models, large language models as well. We've built in a RAG server, right? Because we believe that's a very common use case to build, not just to answer questions, but to build memory for more complex workflows, and even fine tuning to incorporate learning as you go along. So that entire tool set, right? You have a really amazing tool set to get you started and be able to control all of your data and how you use AI. So I'm really, really excited. I can't wait to see how people start using these new tools.
So just a quick question, if you
Yeah.
could give us a thumbs up in the chat or just through reactions, if you're hearing Ronnie or not hearing Ronnie. I guess we've had a couple of reports of
Oh yeah.
difficult audio. And also there's a question in the chat, and I will answer that one, asking about Ronnie's zero to LLM or zero to chat demo from yesterday. I have the file. I just have been so busy I haven't had a chance to post it. So if you come to the community thread later this afternoon, East Coast time, the file will be there along with all the links we shared in yesterday's session. So it looks like audio is working well.
But
Yeah. So Wim, what do you want to add to Ronnie's Ronnie's thoughts about local models?
I think at the core, it's all about the choices that Ronnie mentioned, right? Like having more choices is obviously better than having fewer choices. And it allows us and through us, our clients to have or to make a deliberate choice about these things and think through the consequences of the convenience on one side, where yes, we can use OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic, and it's really that simple, right? You basically subscribe, you pay your money, and away you go. And then we look at the solutions and we figure out what is it that we're sending, and are we comfortable sending that, right? If it's data, if it's intellectual property about the structure, how your solution is built. So those are the considerations to make on what your comfort level is with using commercial providers. And if you don't want to, then you turn around and use the local AI services. That's really fundamentally what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that one of the tenets that we had in building and some of the script steps that, for example, that we showed yesterday, is that even when you have the choice of going cloud or running in your own environment, it's never all or nothing, right? It's not all cloud or all on-prem, for example. At the script step level, you can choose whether or not you want to send that request to the cloud, to a cloud provider, and choose whichever cloud provider you have. So you have a very or you can send it to AI services here locally. So you have very granular control. We believe that, yeah, hybrid flexibility, and because I believe that going forward, right, there'll be very few companies that are going to be. You'll have companies who are going to do everything in the cloud, right? And some will do everything on-prem, but most of us will probably have some balance in between. Well, you're going to have some operations where you're going to use these cloud providers. They're cheaper, they're faster things, but there are other things that you want to do local. And having that ability, having the tool set to be able to do that is really powerful. And this is our first step into that journey.
All right, just before we dive into some demos and deeper detail about the AI services tab, I just wanted to share our poll results a little bit. So our first question, have you deployed any AI-powered features in your FileMaker apps? 16% yes in production, 18% yes in development, 50% no, but I'm planning to, and 15% and I don't know where to start. Well, we're hoping that these community live sessions and the Claris Academy courses we've already published and that we have in development will help you learn where to start. And I'm just going to take a quick scan through the text of why people answered no. Time to learn, time to implement, knowledge, don't have use cases for my customers yet. Process of acquiring hardware for security. It looks like a lot of that. And then 79% answered yes to, do you plan to run local models in production?
Yep. And none of those numbers are surprising, right? Like the early adopters, everybody's at the beginning of their AI journey by and large. And these sessions are exactly about that, right? Like getting everybody through that learning curve, showing the things that we need to consider. like the aspects of what kind of hardware do I need for this. So that's part of what we will answer today, or begin to answer, so that we can make good choices about that.
So, Wim, do you want to give a quick, I don't know what your plan is, if you're going to demo or?
Yep, I'll
shares?
walk everybody through some slides here, and let's flip that around. And then I can show you, I have 3 servers up and running, that we can use to show some of the features and how to configure it, all of these things. And we want to leave plenty of time to field all the questions that you have about this, because as Ronnie said, this is a fundamental choice, and this is the choice that we see there on the screen, that inside your solution, you pick between what providers you want to use for your local language models. And you have your 3 commercial providers, but you can choose custom. If you choose custom, what it really comes down to is you have to provide that script step an endpoint. It's a fully qualified HTTPS URL that points to a server. So that server needs to be up and running somewhere, right? So that we can provide that endpoint. So that's really what it's all about. There is a knowledge base article that is brand new, came out with the release, that will have a long white paper. It's a 30-page white paper that will discuss all of the things that we will discuss today, but in great depth. It'll also begin to point out some best practice around these things, and I'll circle back to that towards the end if we have time for that. But be on the lookout for this knowledge base article, and it'll be in the session notes as well, so you can find it there. So in essence, Claris gives you the ability to run your own AI services, and you do that basically through a UI, an installer and a UI that most of us are comfortable with, right? It's the installer, the same installer that you use for FileMaker Server, and the UI is the admin console. So it really doesn't get simpler than that. And when you enable the AI services, your admin console will give you that URL, that endpoint that you then plop into your configure AI accounts script step, so that you can get running with all of that. Now, one fundamental thing, and you'll see that in the best practices, is for production workloads, you do not want to run that on your main production FileMaker server. And the reasons why will become clear as we step through that, because running AI services uses different kinds of resources and more resources of a particular kind than your typical FileMaker server will use, right? So it'll become crystal clear as we step through that. But keep that in mind as you set out to begin your AI journey, is that if you want to run it locally, and you can self-cloud host or go with a third-party host provider that gives you the level of control and privacy and security that you want. If you're going to run this on-prem for production, you'll be looking at a different server. It kind of depends on best practices or rules of thumb, right? They're not dogmatic, but it's really meant to avoid you any kind of pain, so that you can think through the consequences of your setup. So having AI services that you can run locally is not entirely new, right? We had this with FileMaker 2024, where you could grab the install scripts from your FileMaker server. There's this tools folder. Inside that is a couple of shell scripts that you can use to install the local AI services on Mac OS, on Linux. But it took quite a bit of manual installation. And there was a live webinar, a community live webinar that we've done back in November, I think, where you will see me step through everything that comes with that. So at the end of that, you'll have a running AI services with your FileMaker 2024 server. But that's the main thing that FileMaker 2025 brings, in addition to the extra features, of course. But from a deployment point of view, this is how simple FileMaker 2025 makes it, right? So all of this manual installation, where you had to grab the installers and shell scripts and whatnot and step through the process, that really becomes a simple toggle on an admin console. That's really how simple the FileMaker 2025 makes this, right? Under the hood, it's still the same thing. It's still a Python-based fast API microservice, but how you deploy that is now that simple.
So just a couple deployment questions have come up, and the first is, or generally, does running AI services on a separate FileMaker server consume one of the 3 licenses you get for on-premise? Like what's our stand on licensing?
So I'll take that one in. So for this release, like I said, right now AI services is part of the main FileMaker server installation. In our roadmap, we're going to bring the ability to install AI services as a worker machine in the same way that you install a separate machine for WebDirect, for example, for Claris WebDirect. So in that, all the licensing portion will be taken care of automatically. In the meantime, if you install FileMaker Server just for the AI services, we will not count it as one of your, the license service that you have there. If you have any issues with that, if anybody tells you otherwise, just give me a call. Don't worry about it. But if you should be able to install FileMaker Server just for AI services, and it should not count towards your source of licenses, the ones that you have allocated for your license.
And then I know you may get into this deeper, Wim, but someone's asking, can you dedicate different LLMs for different files on the same FileMaker server? So for example, if you're a solution bundle agreement post, so you're running files for multiple clients on the same server, can you use different models for each file?
Yep. That's a tie-in into what I'll be talking about next. So the short answer is no. The long answer is yes, but it would require setting up different instances of the AI server, which you could probably, if you're really technically savvy, do on the same machine if you wanted to. But out of the box, AI services as configured on a single installation, if you will, of the AI services, can host 3 model types. But we've had the text embedding, image embedding. Ronnie already talked about this. So these are not new. We've had this since FileMaker 2024. New in 2025 is the fact that we have support for text generation models. And this is the answer to the question, really, right? So AI services as configured can run 1 model of each type, not multiple models of the same type, right? It'll become a little more clear as I show you an actual AI services admin console, but yeah. So short answer is no. It's actually a really good point to remember, right? So one of each type of model is what the AI services can host. Fundamentally, if I circle back briefly to what we said about for production workloads, you want a dedicated machine that runs just that. Ronnie made a very, I think, useful parallel. Think of it really as the way that you would install a secondary WebDirect server. It's exactly the same thing, right? So I think that's a really simple way to remember this. So before we go deeper into all of it, I want to tie those 3 types of models that we talked about to the script steps that we as developers will be using, right? So this is an overview of all the script steps and what type of models. You'll have the type of models there as columns, which model does what functionality use, right? So, and that's a sort of fundamental thing to keep in mind. Most of these will be obvious, right? So a lot of the demos yesterday were about generating a response from a model, which uses a text generation model. That's the same kind of models that chat uses. But I want to point out the RAG one, because that's maybe a non-obvious one, because it uses 2 types of models. As you add data to your retrieval augmented generation database, that data needs to be embedded, so it'll require an embedding model. When you ask questions of your RAG data, you're using a text generation model, right? So that's how you can tie in what you intend to build to what kind of models your AI services need to be running. And I'll use this as sort of like the hook to fall back on and circle back as we explain concepts of all things around AI and the types of models. These are the system requirements that Claris provided. And there's a lot of stuff packed in there, a lot of concepts that we need to cover, that we can ask questions about. If some of these acronyms or terms don't make a lot of sense, feel free to call them out. I think first off, I want to note the break along functional lines in those requirements, right? So we have text embedding use at the top there, and then we have text generation and we have fine-tuning at the bottom. We can start with the bottom one because that's one is simple. Fine-tuning is only supported when you're running Apple hardware for your AI services. The reason that the top two are broken up is really comes down to the type of model. Text generation models typically are big. They use a lot of resources. When they say big, they're bigger than embedding models. And I'll show you a very practical example in a minute there. But fundamentally, that's why it comes down to, right? Text generation uses a lot more resources, uses bigger models. So you'll need more beefier hardware than you need for anything else, if it's just embedding like you were able to do with FileMaker 2024. Right. On the left-hand side there in color, I highlighted some of those acronyms and concepts. So if you look at the Windows and Linux versus Apple hardware, it makes a big difference. Especially, and again, I'll focus on the text generation part there. When you want to deploy AI services on Windows and Linux, you will need to have a machine that has NVIDIA graphics processing units, basically NVIDIA hardware in it. So that's fundamental. What that allows is the use of CUDA, and CUDA, the term, it's all explained in the white paper. I don't want to waste too much time getting into that, but think of it as an accelerator for AI workloads, right? And CUDA is specific to NVIDIA hardware, right? You cannot get CUDA if you have non-NVIDIA GPUs in your machine. AI workloads use a lot of that graphics processing unit, right? Because those are different than CPUs, because GPUs, or the graphics power processing units, are all about doing lots of small calculations, a lot of math in essence, but doing a lot of math in parallel. That's what GPUs do really well, and they do it much better than CPUs. From that, we can distill that if you want to run AI services, you will need a machine with plenty of GPUs, right? And for instance, and that's one of the things that is a big difference between what you typically have as a FileMaker server versus what you would have for your production loads as your for running AI services, right? FileMaker server in and by itself has no great use of GPUs, but AI workloads absolutely must have GPUs to get through that, right? So Apple hardware has, well, not all of it, but the M chips, the Apple Silicon chips, have both CPU and GPU cores, so they're sort of built in.
Mm-hmm.
GPUs will need their own kind of memory, and that's why we have under the Windows and Ubuntu thing, there's something called VRAM, which we don't have on the other side. Video RAM, or VRAM, is the memory, specific kind of memory that GPUs use, right? So for GPUs to function properly, they need a lot of video memory. They can use a little bit of the memory that CPUs use, but you want to avoid that because any handoff there is going to slow things down. Apple hardware uses something called unified memory, which is the same kind of memory that can be used for video RAM as for CPU RAM. So that's a fundamental difference there between the two.
There's a few questions about hardware. I think some are answered in chat, but I guess this is for Ronnie or Wim. Is there a reason fine-tuning is not supported on Windows and Ubuntu?
This is the initial release, and so we'll definitely try. But just in general, Apple hardware is really good at this. When mentioning, you know, the way Apple hardware is architected and the built-in, the M1 and the M series of processors built in are just really good, and so it's easier for us to tackle there. When you start looking at Windows and Linux machines, you have to start looking at specific GPUs and how to support those. And there's a lot of processing that happens in fine-tuning, even more than just regular text generation. So this is just a start. You know, we're looking at expanding support for it, but you know, we're starting with Apple hardware.
Yep, and as a choice, looking inside from the outside, I'm totally fine with that choice, right? Because if you models are pre-trained on a bunch of data, and usually that is sufficient to answer generic questions and general questions. If you want to supplement the model with your own data, I think most of us will be turning to RAG versus fine-tuning a model, right?
Yeah.
Both typically serve the same purpose, meaning that you want to change the model or give the model some very specific business-specific information so that the answers the business-centered questions that you ask of the data will be answered with the context of your business data. I think most of us will be turning to RAG and not so much fine-tuning in the short term.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few questions about just how much RAM, the video RAM, I think specifically for text generation, and it looks like they were answered in chat, but I don't know, Wim or Ronnie, if you want to weigh in on the VRAM requirements.
Yep, absolutely. Short answer, it depends. It depends on the type of model that you want to use. So I can shortcut the process a little bit and jump straight to where that is. If you install AI services on a machine, and this is a Mac that I'm running this on, this is a Mac Studio, there'll be a FileMaker LLM folder inside library. Inside there's a hidden cache folder that is the hub of all the downloaded models, right? So there's a bunch of them here. I'll point out a few. Let me do the view options here so we can actually see some sizes on these things. So if I use the Gemma 3 model, for instance, right, which is one of the default models that, and I'll come back to the slides there. This is one of the models that comes pre-configured when you install AI services. The size of that model is 24 gigs, right? For a model to function efficiently, ideally, all of that is loaded into memory. So this is a good example of how much memory you would use just to load the model. You'll need more memory than that for operational use. The operating system and the hardware will use some of its own memory in addition to all of that. But just purely focusing on the amount of memory that you'll need for basically just hosting the model, that's sort of like the size of it. Some of this will be bigger if you go up in size, right? So if I wanted to use a this is actually this is the 27 billion parameter. So this is a 12 billion parameter. Parameters, the number of parameters correspond to the size of the model and by extension to the accuracy of the model. The bigger the model, the more accurate and relevant the answers will be, right? So that's the thing to remember. And that is expressed by billions of parameters. So the more billions of parameters your model will have, the bigger the model will be, right? So this is a 12 billion parameter. I'll touch on something that we'll circle back to in a minute. So this is a 12 billion parameter model, comes in at 24 gigs. This is a 27 billion parameter, so it's more than double the size and number of parameters. So you'd be right to assume that the size of the model would be twice as big, and it isn't, right? This one comes in at just over 31 gigs. The reason for that is that last bit here, the 8-bit. That speaks to the concept of quantization, and I'll cover that in a sec, right? So there's a lot of variances there depending on the size of the model, the accuracy that you're shooting for, and whether a quantized version of the model will work for you. Short answer is that it's going to take a fair bit of experimentation when you pick your models to find the one that gives you that right balance between size and the system requirements that you will need, system resources, and the accuracy that you'll be shooting for. So that's the short answer there.
Yep.
So when you enable AI services on your new deployment, these are the models that are shown by default. So these are the models that they are not loaded; they are basically pre-configured, right? So you can see here in the column, with the statums column, they're all unloaded. There are some red exclamation marks next to some of these. So when you see those, they can fall into one of two categories. The ones on the left-hand side will typically be an indication that the hardware that you're on isn't sufficient for the model that you're trying to load, right? So the CoGemma 7 billion parameter one, and I took the screenshot on a Mac Mini with 16 gigs of RAM, and it tells me it's borderline, right? It says you need 16 gigs of RAM just for this model to run efficiently. You only have 16 gigs of memory in that machine as a whole. The operating system will use some. So it's an indication that this is borderline. The one on the right-hand side is just because I haven't acknowledged that it's okay to download this model, right? The AI services as it comes makes you acknowledge that it's okay to download these models because of the size of the models. Sometimes that's not trivial, right? A 24 gig download is not something that you would want your FileMaker server to do for you without you knowing it, right? Because there's a disk space consideration and all of these things. I want to circle back real quick to this. If you look at the total size of my hub at this point, this is after some experimentation. I've already used 230 odd gigabytes of disk space just to play with different models, right? So keep that in mind as you do some experimentation with these local models. We talked about this a little bit, right? We're going to start on the right-hand side. You want the answers to the questions that you ask of your data to be relevant. I think that's a given, right? You want them fast and you want them accurate. So you work backwards from that to pick a model that is big enough to give you that, but small enough that you don't run into extreme requirements when it comes to your hardware that you want to run this on. So there's a bit of an equation to that. Quantization, we touched on that a little bit. Oops, let's go back to that. A model at full precision, as they call it, will store all of these billions of parameters. Each parameter will take 16 bits or 2 bytes, right? That's typically how you can calculate the size of model 2. You have the number of parameters times 2 bytes, and that gives you the size of the model. Quantization will reduce that precision, if you will, of the model from, say, the full 16 bits to 8 bits, or down to 4 bits, or down to 2 bits. As you step through that quantization, you will lose accuracy. So you want to potentially go down from 16 bits to 8 bits, but we would recommend not going down from there. Or if you want to go down from 8 bits, I would say test, right? Run some tests against the 8-bit model, the 4-bit model, see what kind of accuracy you lose as you're asking some questions of your models there.
Yeah.
Last sentence there. Go ahead, Ronnie.
I was going to say one of the ways I like to think about quantization is like compression. So imagine an image, and you can say, right, and you have compression algorithms. As you compress it more and more, these models become smaller, but as Wim says, they become less powerful, right? So there's less parameters, if you will, in there. There's less there, and so they're smaller, but then they may not be as powerful as the uncompressed versions or the higher versions. So yeah, for what it's worth.
Yep, and there's no simple answer to that, right? It really comes down to testing, right? For some business cases, it makes sense that you have somewhat less accuracy. For some business cases, you need the full accuracy, and that means that you may want to be running the full size model. The AI services that Claris provides actually has a very neat feature that is available on the Windows and Linux side of things, and it's called quantization on the fly, right? So you can give it a full-size model, and it will quantize that, if that's even the right word, quantize it down to the 8-bit on the fly, which is great, right? And it only goes down to 8-bit for that same reason, right? Based on the testing that Claris has done, it doesn't make sense to go down in accuracy or compression, if you will, to use Ronnie's term, down from 8 bits. Right? So we have those 5 models that come pre-configured, that are easy to download in the AI services admin console there. If you want other models, huginface.co is the place to go, right? So you can search for any model that you want. One quick hint, it's also in the best practices. On Apple hardware, Apple supports MLX, right? So that CUDA thing that I mentioned, that's that's NVIDIA, so that applies to Windows and Linux boxes. Apple has its own thing called MLX. So if you want to have the best performance out of your Apple hardware, go look for the MLX models that you can find on Hugging Face. So when you find a model, you see this little thing here on the right-hand side. You copy the name, you put it in the Add a Model UI of your AI services. You tell it what type of model it is, and away you go. Once you say there's a hidden yes there underneath that drop down. But if you say yes, that's the acknowledgement that it's okay to download. It'll get downloaded and then get loaded. Remember, AI services can only load one type of each model. So if this is a text generation model, which it is, and you already had a text generation model loaded in your AI services, adding a model like this and acknowledging that you want to download it will swap out the models, right? So this new one will be the one that is loaded. The other one will get unloaded. So keep that in mind.
And before you go on, I just have a question, I think probably for Ronnie. And does Claris at this point have plans to provide hosted models as part of the FileMaker cloud service? What support is planned for cloud for local models? Or
yeah, so we're looking at the different ways of providing a way to run models within the environment. I'm not in position to say exactly what that'll look like, but we are looking at ways into making sure that from the cloud, from FileMaker Cloud perspective, you'll be able to run models in a controlled environment. I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, and another question, and I think this goes into model selection. How can you determine a model's trustworthiness when you download it? And is bringing a downloaded an open source model into your own on-premise environment a security risk?
It's a good and very valid question. And the model itself has no outbound connectivity, right? It's just that it's a model. It's a set of files, but they're not executables. They don't make calls themselves. You make calls to them. So from that perspective, it's not a security risk, right? Like it's not like you're bringing something in your environment that has outbound connectivity or will reach out to the world phone home or anything like that. So none of that happens. The trustworthiness is slightly different. That speaks to the quality of the answer and whether the answer is truthful in essence, right? There is in the Soliant executive summary for all features FileMaker 2025, early in the AI section, I mentioned a couple of skills that collectively we will have to develop, and one of them is called AI validation, right? And I'm not making this up. This is an actual field of skills in the AI space, and it's geared towards externally validating that the answers you get from the model are actually correct, accurate, trustworthy, all of these things. And I think that's a skill that we will need to do, right?
Yes.
If we start adding AI features and we ask it to generate a report that brings back some numbers, as a developer, I want to make sure that I can vouch for the feature that I just built, meaning that the client needs to be convinced that the numbers that AI generates or the report that the AI generates is actually true, right? So so it is a new skill set that we will need to learn and find ways of making that as easy for all of us as we can make it.
I'm just.
All right, while you're looking for more questions there, the best practices that you see on screen are taken from that knowledge base article. And as best practices typically tend to be, they are written in as simple form as you can make them. And some of them are formulated quite harshly, if you will. And that's on purpose, right? They are meant to give you pause. If you read one and it doesn't make sense or you don't agree with it, that's actually a good thing. Because it means that once that white paper that these things are distilled from is published, you can go read up on the rationale for why this is stated as a best practice for what it is, right? If I highlight the first one, because Ronnie and I were just talking about this before the webinar, as stated, it sounds dogmatic. And again, best practices are meant to be stated in simple form. What we really mean is that think about this, right? Certainly for production workloads, you do not want to be running this on your main production FileMaker server. I think you've seen the size of a text generation model, the fact that it uses a bunch of GPU resources, compute resources that your FileMaker server has to use for. I think it's only logical that you want to separate that to a different machine. if we're talking about that experimentation that we will all have to go through, sure, you can run it on your development and test FileMaker server, right? Because it's a machine that you have available. Why wouldn't you? Keep in mind that if you only have a Mac Mini with 16 gigs of RAM, you will not be able to load a 24 gig model, right? So there's certain things that will and will not work depending on the specs of your development and test machine there. But as you read through these best practices, again, if they do not make sense or you don't agree with them conceptually, let's have a conversation about those in the community through these webinars, because this is the kind of conversation that will help us all get through that learning curve as fast as we can make it.
Great.
Yeah, I just want to have you reiterate a question. Is it possible to configure AI services to load the model on an external server, so not your main production FileMaker server machine?
Not right now. So right now in this release, AI services and the models will run on the same machine. And so we are in our roadmap. We have now accounted that we are going to make it possible to install AI services as a worker machine in the same way, for example, that today you install a WebDirect, worker machine. So you'll be able to manage everything from your main installation, main deployment machine, FileMaker Server, admin console, yet the resources will be in a separate machine or machines, right? But for this release, we had to make a decision, right? We could either wait a lot longer and have all the features there, or bring these features here today and have it start going through that learning curve. But for the time being, you can install another deployment of FileMaker Server on a separate machine and use it just for AI services. You don't have to load any FileMaker files there. The great thing is that the script steps that leverage these services are not bound to the machine where the FileMaker files are hosted. So you can reference a completely different machine. You have files hosted on machine A, they can reference AI services on machine B, right? They're not bound, and that is by design. We've created AI services as a completely separate process that we'll be able to install on a separate machine. So you'll be able to reference those, as Wim mentioned at the beginning, right? That base URL, you can be able to put that into your script steps, and that can point to a completely different machine than your main database, FileMaker Server machine.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
And it also answers the question that we had earlier about, can you use specific models for specific functionality inside the same solution, right? So, so the longer answer was yes, just install multiples of these AI services, because everyone just is a unique endpoint, right? At the core of all of these AI services, all these script steps, it's just an API call.
It's just an
right?
API.
So you can have multiple API calls going out to multiple AI servers or AI services servers. And it doesn't really matter, right? Like you wouldn't be able to do it on one single machine, but there's nothing preventing you from installing multiple machines and separating it out that way.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I want to call this out quickly. This is an installed AI services. This is on a Linux machine. I'll go there. And this is the feature that I mentioned that is only available on when you install the AI services on a Windows or a Ubuntu machine that has NVIDIA hardware. This feature becomes available there, and that's what I call the quantization on the fly. So if you toggle that on, then you can load a full precision model, and when it gets loaded into memory and when the Claris uses it or the AI services use it, it'll get quantized down to 8 bits. So basically roughly half the size of the full model, and it does that on the fly. You can quantize. Actually, the README has instructions. The README for the AI services has instructions on how to quantize your own models, right? Or even to take your model, as I mentioned, when you run on Apple hardware, you want MLX versions of models. It includes instructions on how to take a model. If you have a preferred model and there's no MLX variant, you can MLX it. That's not a version, but I just made up a verb.
We will coin it. We will attribute it to Wim now.
There you go. So the README is great. It's a long README, but it has instructions on how to do this yourself from the command line. So you can prep all of that stuff up. All right. And this is another one that I have. Actually, let me go back. So this is the Linux box that has NVIDIA hardware, right? So you can see it has 4 NVIDIA GPUs, 810Gs. Each one has 24 gigs of memory, so for a total of 96 gigs of RAM, if I have my math right. If I go to my trusty Mac Studio, the Mac Studio here is an M4 Max. So this one comes with 128 gigs of RAM, and this is unified RAM, right? So whereas the Linux box, it gets its video RAM, so the RAM that the models can use is specific built into those NVIDIA GPUs. For Apple hardware, it's the total size of the unified memory that you get to play with. As you can see here, let me show you which models I have loaded on this one. I have loaded this text embedding model, the MLX version of the Gemma 3 model, which is a 27-bit billion parameter quantized down to 8 bits. And there is a image embedding model. So I have one of each loaded. And as you can see here, the memory consumed at rest, because I'm not putting any loads on there, is 45 gigs of RAM, right? So gives you an indication of what you would need to replicate this setup where you have one of each model hosted on an AI services.
So question generally about AI services. Does it matter if the machine on which you're running AI services is a physical hardware or a virtual machine in a data center? And I think that could either mean a corporate data center or a cloud service like AWS.
Fundamentally, it doesn't matter, right? Because this Linux box that I'm looking at here is an AWS instance. It's a G5, 12 extra large. If you have your own data center and your company uses VMware, the real consequence is that you will have to have NVIDIA hardware that is capable of being virtualized, right? There's something called vGPUs, and NVIDIA sells that hardware. It's just more expensive than a GPU card, NVIDIA GPU card that you would put into a bare metal machine. But fundamentally, it does matter. Virtualization is fully supported.
This one's probably for Ronnie. Is there a difference when you're using any of the AI script steps we talked about yesterday? What does the difference look like if you're running a local model versus one of the public models?
The only difference literally is in the configure AI account script step, which is the one that we do first just to configure that. That is going to be the only difference. So in the provider parameter there, instead of choosing OpenAI or Anthropic, you're going to choose custom, and you're going to put in the URL that you see that Wim was showing there. That is the only difference. Everything else remains the same. What that means too, by the way, is that you could test things with, say, with OpenAI, with some of their models, and play around with some of these things. And then when you're ready, you can literally just switch over this one script step from OpenAI to custom, and everything else will work the exact same way. From an API standpoint, right? You might have to change the prompts a little bit, right? Because you might have different models and things like that. But at least from a configuration standpoint, they work exactly the same way. That's the only difference that that's the only change you'll have to make.
Yep. And I want to call out this function here, which is one of the newer get functions. It's going to be your best friend for a lot of this work, right? To Ronnie's points, sometimes you want to experiment with local models before you consider doing this with OpenAI or Cohere or Anthropic. All the commercial providers will charge you by the millions of tokens, right? So it'll be important for you to know that the functionality that you built, how many of those tokens that it uses. And Claris gives you that information to this get function, right? So get into the habit of tracking that and accumulating the information as you build your functionality to get a sense of the token usage that you're consuming, because it'll allow you to predict what kind of cost that you would have if you go to OpenAI or one of the other providers.
So just a quick question. Can you confirm that get tokens used function and any of the other token script steps work no matter what model you're using, local or public?
So there's two functions. One allows you to calculate tokens based off, so you can put whatever text you in there. So this is kind of more of like pre-call. You want to find out how many tokens this might be if you're sending something off. But the get last token depends a little bit on the API. If I remember correctly, I think all the three providers that we support include provide that in there. I'll have to double check with engineering, but I know at least OpenAI does that because it's based off of the API response, and we just parse it out and provide it there for you. But for sure, OpenAI and our own AI services does provide that there. Although there is a checkbox in the admin console, you need to turn that on just because there's a little extra calculation for us to include that in there. But it is there. So there goes, yeah, log token usage. So if you turn that on, that function will work with your local models.
Okay, and I want to call out, please remember to jump in and complete our closing survey to let us know if we've helped you on your learning journey, and let us know if you're planning to deploy FileMaker Server 2025. So I don't know, Wim, if you have much left. There are a lot more questions.
Yeah,
So,
just one thing real quick that I want to call out, which is potentially something that will catch us out. On the script here, I'm loading a model and then using the generate response from model using that model. Then I switch to another model and do the same thing, generate response from model. If you do that, and assuming that these models are pre-configured on your AI services, the act of doing this will unload the one model from your AI services and load the other one server side, right? So keep that in mind. The AI services can only load one model of each type. So if you make it switch models in your code, there's a penalty there on the server side as it has to unload the model that was loaded and loads the other model. So keep that in mind as you're experimenting. You may find, why is this slow? If both of these models are big, like the multi-gigabytes kind of models, there's going to be some slowness as the server switches gears in essence. So keep that in mind.
all right.
There's one question here that I'd like to attach before. Somebody asking here, Alex is asking, so if you split calls between, say, OpenAI and self-hosted LLMs, can you do that? So could you split that up? So for example, have sensitive calls sent to self-hosted, but have generic calls go to something like OpenAI? The answer is absolutely yes, and that is the reason why we built it, and we built it this way, so that you have the choice. You can split calls. You can have calls either go to a cloud provider, and you're not even limited to a particular cloud provider. You might have, as I do, accounts with all of them, and you might want, as you find, because as you start experimenting, you find that certain models are really good at certain tasks, even across providers. And so you might want to use a model from provider A for certain things, a different model from provider B for different things, and yet an open source model locally to do something completely different, maybe for sensitive, maybe to process sensitive data. So the answer, absolutely yes.
Yep. And there's a redundancy aspect to that too, right? Like as the AI functionality becomes more critical in our solutions, maybe you want to build in that redundancy that if there's an outage on OpenAI,
Yes.
that you basically make the calls to the other one provider, right? So you can certainly build that in.
Yep.
So this, I think, question is for Wim. When you're switching models, as you had that script configured to switch models, I think the question is, how would the penalty manifest? Like, what would be the result?
The result would be some delay as the AI services microservice components has to physically unload the model and load the other one. So it has to read from disk, load it into memory, and then answer your question, right? So there's going to be a delay.
Okay. So I think for Ronnie, is it possible to use the AWS AI models via the custom connection? And can those be integrated with FileMaker Server?
That's a good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes is the answer. There is a caveat because AWS Bedrock by default it doesn't doesn't follow the OpenAI standards. And remember when we said everything's just an API call, and Ronnie was hinting at that too with the token usage included in the API response from the provider. When you use the custom option right here, everything follows the OpenAI data structures, right? The way that the call is made, the response that you'll get is in the OpenAI format. AWS Bedrock doesn't do that by default, but you can just put something in the middle between your FileMaker and Bedrock that will convert the question and the answer, the response, into OpenAI, and away you go. It wouldn't be this way, right? It wouldn't be through the AI services as we have them now. You would have to have an additional component somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. And we had Todd yesterday had said he had already tested several services out there with that custom option from those script steps, because a lot of the software and a lot of the providers are compatible with OpenAI API. So there's a lot of options there. Because we built it that way, you'll be able to choose different providers, different services, different software as well.
Oh. It's a question, and I don't know if this is a little bit of a facetious question, I think. In the long run, is running a local server better than making Sam Altman richer?
I don't know how to answer that. What I will say, again, we want to make sure that you have the option. And I strongly believe that there's going to be times where it's going to make more sense for you to send a request to, to a cloud provider, because it's going to be faster, it might be cheaper for certain things. But there's other times where you're going to want to run this in an environment that you control, that you have more control over that. Just having the ability to do those things and be able to have the conversation of when that makes sense is extremely empowering, and we want to make sure that you have the tools to have those conversations and have those choices. So I just wanted to stress that out.
And I'll expand on that as well. Of all the reasons why you would choose a local model, the cost predictability, I think it's real, but it's probably the least important to me, right? Like for me, it's going to be all about security and privacy. The AI landscape is moving so fast that it gives me pause a little bit when it comes to privacy and security, right? Like it's things are going to happen. I would want to be extremely careful. And again, that doesn't mean that it applies to all of your solution, black or white, right? Like you can pick and choose, but the things we've already had conversations with school boards, hospitals, anything in healthcare where they make a stance to say we will just not, right? Like will have to be a local model, and it makes a lot of sense when you talk to them.
Okay, well, thank you, Wim. Thank you, Ronnie. And I'll just share out a little bit on our closing polls. And I think that the two things to share are, after this episode, how confident are you to run and install and run a local AI model? And we've got a nice bell curve with about 44% saying somewhat confident, 17% confident, 10% very confident, and then about 30% not confident or not ready at all. So we're hoping that these sessions will continue to help improve your confidence, keep your eyes open for the white paper. And then for what's one improvement you were inspired to make because of today's session? The two biggest results are test commercial AI first and learn more. And then generally, I think there's a lot about testing. Like a lot of people have said things like other variations on testing in a test environment.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We hope you can join Wim and Ronnie this afternoon on Richard Carlton's live stream, and join me on Monday and Tuesday next week. And also, I just want to add, for customers on the West Coast and in Asia, we've added a special Ask Me Anything community live with the Claris team on July 24th. Registration for that will be available very soon. And thanks, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.